best entertainment on the earth. Tune in for Comics with Perch.
なんかいたずらするって言っても、まあシャンプー、エンドレスシャンプーは気づくか気づかない。
だってでもあんなこうお湯の中にねこうなんで液体ですもんね、わかんないと思います多分。
こう一生懸命なにシャンプーしてても、まあこれでお湯流したら。
あんなこうお湯の中にねこうなんで液体ですもんね、わかんないと思います多分。
こう一生懸命なにシャンプーしてても、まあこれでお湯流したからもう終わり。
Hey everybody, this is Perch. I'm still hung up there because a lot of us are talking about right now, in part because of the Thor movie, in part because of Miles, in part because of all this stuff. This idea of legacy characters, and where I keep coming back to, and I know many of you listening right now disagree, is several of these characters are decent characters. The worst aspect about them is the legacy part, is the part where they have to almost figure out a reason to explain why they have the same identity, name, costume, powers, or whatever, as a former character. I haven't read the new Blade's Daughter comic, but what if this character is actually, a decent, interesting, compelling vampire hunter character? Could be interesting. The worst part about that comic is going to be them trying to explain, like, you're the new Blade now. I mean, if you watched, and it kind of hit home with me with the Hawkeye show, where the Kate character was built up fairly well, had a lot of good kind of imposter syndrome, had some confidence, had some insecurity. It was a nice bundled mix. I think the people who write her stories for the comic books could learn a lot about, hey, don't make your characters all perfect. Make them struggle with things. They're more likable that way. And it wasn't a bad character. But also, did you notice, other than sort of a tease right at the very end, they never did the she's Hawkeye or she's the real Hawkeye. And it could be that when we see this character again, if there's a new series or everything, they're going to insert a bunch of really cringy, like, no, I'm the real Hawkeye, the better Hawkeye. Like, they could do that. But, if they do, it will be kind of at the expense of the work they already did. They didn't build the character up that way. The comic book certainly did. But the movie or the show had a much more well-rounded character. So as we go along, like, whoever these characters are, I often find there's a seed of a good idea there. And it just goes sideways when it's like, no, I'm Iron Man now. It's like, or not, or you're not. Or why is that important to you? That's the stuff that just, it kind of almost grinds a story to a screeching halt. So I think this reader feels about the same, but let's see what the listener feels the same. Look at me, all old-fashioned. It says, hey, Perch, I hope you're doing well. Getting over a cold, actually. My plan is to find at least one video you do per day and email you about that. One video a day, how quaint. Anyway, you can expect this until I get bored and forget. Okay. So I saw your video about What If Miles Morales, and I have not bought the series because I don't care. Let me start over again. I have not bought the series because I don't care, but I don't know if I'm fully convinced about your view of things. All right. Isn't one of the things that makes a character like Batman so enduring the fact that he is so malleable? Batman, there are comics where Superman becomes Batman, Batman becomes Green Lantern, and people seem to like the dark multiverse Batman, where Batman is other characters. Sort of. There's a backlash on that. I mean, people, they liked it, but the everything is Batman certainly got some groans. But there's another difference there, which we'll get to in a second. So why is Batman able to be other characters, but Miles isn't? What is it about those two brands that says Batman can be whatever, but Miles has to be Spider-Man? And is there a way to get Miles to a point where he can be as malleable as Batman? Good question. Yes, there is. There is. Absolutely. It's called 60 Years. Batman, Bruce Wayne, is so established in that role and was the originator in that role. But even if he wasn't, let's assume, let's pretend for a moment that there was some other Batman, somebody else that wasn't Bruce Wayne, who was Batman, running around from 1920 to 1960, 40 years. And then it transferred to Bruce Wayne. That's not what happened. But in 2020, there's been so many comics, so much establishment over who Bruce Wayne Batman is, kind of his mannerisms, his cynical nature, the whole thing, that you can do these comics where he's Green Lantern for an issue or whatever. Again, it's still a lot of people still groan and roll their eyes at that, but it's easier for that to be done because the character is established. It's established as his own identity. Arguably, the Bruce Wayne Batman, that kind of character, that whole persona, it transcended whatever was going on in all other parts of the comic. You knew the personality of Batman. It's why writers can come in, they can have Batman guest star in another comic, and his personality is so well defined, so established. Then you can toy with it by turning him into Wonder Woman, and it works ish. But Miles is new. Miles is less than 10. Is it less than? I think a less than 10 years old character. I'm not sure that's true. It's close. But Miles doesn't have that under his belt, and a lot of his time as Miles has been spent trying to separate himself, trying to establish an identity apart from Peter Parker, because he came in as the replacement for Peter Parker when Ultimate Peter died. And so already you're off to a weird foot because you're having to kind of justify why this is a real person, why Miles is different. How is Miles different? Is this a cynical marketing grab, or is there a real character there? And they've been struggling to do that. I think one of the things that helped it the best was the Into the Spider-Verse movie, where they portrayed Miles very differently, and there they had Peter Parker, in the movie at the same time, so they could really contrast the two, and you started to get a sense of who this character was. It worked, but again, this is recent history, and so now saying, "Hey, let's just make Miles all the rest of the things too," it kind of undoes that work. He hasn't established himself yet, let alone now tossing him into other things. That's my take on the character. I think that I think that Miles is got certainly a lot of potential. I think there's a lot of interest in what you can do with him. I think that if you let it play out, again, the weakest part of him is going to be him having to prove that he's a real Spider-Man. That's going to be the hardest part. So the company would be best served to doing what Spider-Verse did, keep pushing on making Miles, on making him his own identity, on making him a kind of bedrock, understood character. From there, sure, you can do these other things, but I think it barely worked in the Dark Multiverse. I think the reason why, Metal was successful was because people got excited about this kind of event comic that didn't feel like a crisis, but instead felt like something. It just felt different. And it had a good art team on it, it had a good a big name writer on it, and so it worked as a comic. The Death Metal event worked a lot less. It still sold, but there was a sense of like, oh, crap, more Batman, dinosaur Batman. I mean, there was a sense that Snyder was kind of taking the piss out of the readers by just throwing just shooting Batman in for everything. And so it almost became a parody of itself. It also served to make these other efforts, like Miles being these other things, feel more corny. In some ways, I think that Death Metal helped almost burn the whole idea down because it overdid it so much, but it overdid it for a character that is like probably the most well-known, most defined, most established character in all of comics, which is Batman. So I think that's, to me, that's the rub. You could argue this is just a fun story. It's just fun. Miles is Thor. Sure, I guess. But I think that the comic publisher hasn't really earned some of the credibility needed to screw around with the characters and the IP and have fun in this way. I think that they're struggling to. I think they're just struggling to find their footing, and so doing this nah, he can be anybody stuff is I don't think it helps. So that's my perspective. I think if you give Miles 40 years and you do a good job really defining his character, sure, you could probably do this more. But it still is. I mean, the other problem in all this is it's a trope. We had the Spider-Verse comic event where you saw Peter Parkers from all over the place. I mean, they've gone to the well with this idea a lot, and I don't think it serves. I think it's serving the comic good less and less and less as time goes by. So, every time they do this, it just makes everything feel reductive rather than benefiting anyone. But I mean, it didn't help that the stories themselves, the what if stories, were almost clone copies of each other. It's like, oh, one of the villains will be Uncle Miles, and he'll be kind of a traitor because he's kind of a traitor in the regular comic, but he's got a heart of gold, so he'll turn it around at the end. Like, I don't know, can Miles have a good story that isn't like that? It was, yeah, it worked in Into the Spider-Verse, and then it was copied for the video game, and then it was copied in the comics, and it was copied in the what if versions of the comics. It's like, all right, can you chill a little bit with old Uncle Aaron and what he's up to? Just can you stop? Anyway, that's my perspective. Thanks for writing in. We'll see if you keep going with one mail a day. We'll see how that all works. And for the rest of you, what do you think? Mantles, identities, when does it make sense? When can things be swapped? Thanks for listening.